My name is Evelyn Marchand. I'm 64. The envelope arrived on a humid Thursday afternoon, pressed neatly between grocery circulars and an alumni magazine I no longer read. Heavy cream paper, my name handwritten in elegant copperplate, the kind that tries too hard. I knew that handwriting before I even touched it, Camille's. My daughter-in-law never did anything halfway, not even polite cruelty. The Charleston sun had baked the porch railings all day, and the mail felt warm against my fingers. I stood there a moment before opening it, as if the heat might warn me what waited inside. When I finally slid a finger under the flap, a faint trace of her perfume, orange blossom, and something expensive rose like a ghost. Inside was a gilt invitation. Marchand and Roche Atelier, grand opening Broad Street, Friday evening. Beneath in smaller letters, family and close friends are warmly welcome. The words looked gentle enough, but they cut like polished glass. I hadn't been to one of Camille's events in over 2 years. The last time I'd offered to help arrange flowers. She'd smiled and told me better to let the professionals handle it, Evelyn. That smile still hung in my memory like a painting I couldn't take down. Before I could decide whether to toss the invitation or hide it under the pile of bills, the phone rang. My son's voice came bright careful. "Mom, did you get the envelope?" "Yes," I said, sitting at the kitchen table. The wood was worn smooth where my hands always rested. "She really wants you to come this time." "Does she?" Camille's nervous. It's her first real boutique. Her investors are flying in. She's been working on it for months. David always spoke about his wife like a diplomat explaining another nation's customs. I loved him for trying. "It sounds lovely," I said. "Please come." For me, his tone softened a son's plea slipping through the careful polish. I looked around my small house, the quiet one I'd moved into after retiring from the Charleston Museum of Textiles. Bolts of fabric lined the shelves, muted blues and cream silks. I couldn't quite give up. In the corner, my old Singer machine sat under a drop cloth, like an old friend waiting for a visit. "All right," I said finally. "I'll come." He exhaled relief and something heavier in the sound. "She'll be happy to see you." After the call, I stared again at the invitation. The lettering shimmered faintly under the kitchen light. I thought of the years between us, the polite holidays, the rehearsed smiles, the way Camille's accent sharpened whenever she felt the need to remind me she was the worldly one. I couldn't remember the last real conversation we'd had that wasn't about David or schedules. Outside, thunder rolled in from the harbor. The air smelled like salt and rain, and for a moment, I wished the storm would flood Broad Street and make the whole thing impossible. But storms in Charleston come and go quickly, and promises to sons are harder to wash away. I placed the invitation on the mantel beside the framed photograph of David at his wedding. Camille's smile in that picture was perfect, every tooth visible, every angle deliberate. I remembered thinking then, how she looked like someone stepping into a life she already believed she owned. By evening, the rain had stopped. I poured a glass of sweet tea, folded the invitation back into its envelope, and set it on the counter where I wouldn't forget it. The gold lettering caught the last of the light as I switched off the lamp. Tomorrow, I'd have to find a gift. Something thoughtful. Something that spoke of grace without pretending too hard. The kind of gesture that could pass for peace, at least for one night. The next morning began quietly, the kind of Charleston morning that hums rather than wakes. I brewed coffee, buttered a piece of toast I barely tasted, and tried not to think about what I would wear to Camille's opening. The invitation lay on the counter, gold letters glinting under the kitchen light, waiting for me to decide what sort of mother-in-law I intended to be. I went to the small cedar chest by the window, where I kept the things that didn't belong to any particular time in my life, just the ones I hadn't been able to let go of. Inside were neat stacks of linen handkerchiefs, bits of lace from long-closed ateliers, and a few folded silks wrapped in tissue. When I opened the paper, the scent of old dye and faint perfume escaped the smell of another country, clinging after all these years. The scarf lay there light as breath, pale ivory with faded crimson edges. I'd bought it in Lyon nearly 40 years ago from a textile restorer who'd worked with the Musée de Tissus. It was never meant to be worn. It was a study piece, part of a small batch of experimental patterns that never reached production. The craftsman had called it un essai de patience, an exercice in patience. I'd loved the phrase immediately. My fingers traced the slight irregularities in the weave, the hand-dyed threads that caught light unevenly. Each imperfection told the story of the human touch that had made it. I'd kept it all these years not because it was valuable, but because it reminded me of who I used to be, a woman who could still travel, still begin again. It felt strange to think of giving it away. Stranger still that I wanted to. Camille admired luxury, but rarely history. She saw fabrics as statements, not legacies. Yet, something in me hoped that maybe if she could feel the thread between our worlds, mine of preservation, hers of presentation, she might sense the bridge I'd been trying to build. I laid the scarf flat on the table and smoothed out its corners. The silk shimmered faintly in the light the way the water does near the battery when the tide turns. I wrapped it in crisp tissue paper, then reached for one of my old museum note cards. The edges were yellowed, but the paper still carried that soft linen weight that feels good between the fingers. On it, I wrote in small, careful cursive, à la beauté du fil et du cœur, to the beauty of thread and heart. I paused before signing my name. It felt almost too intimate, too exposed, but I left it anyway. By noon, the scarf sat in its box, tied with a thin satin ribbon from my sewing drawer. Not perfect. Nothing of mine ever was, but sincere. I stood by the window, the late sunlight spilling across the floor, and watched the street below. A group of college students passed, laughing, their voices light and easy. I envied their unearned fearlessness. When I turned back, the box seemed small against the wide kitchen table, like a fragile offering. I placed it beside my purse so I wouldn't forget it. Outside, the magnolia tree rustled in the salt wind. The day had turned soft, but my hands felt cold. Tomorrow night, I would see my daughter-in-law again, and the years between us would either fold like fabric or tear where the thread had worn too thin. Charleston glowed that evening the way it does just after sunset, when the air turns the color of copper and the street lamps hum alive. Broad Street was crowded, the kind of crowd that drinks with intention and laughs too loudly at things meant to sound sophisticated. I parked a block away, the heels of my shoes clicking against the uneven cobblestones, the small gift box tucked neatly in my purse. The boutique stood at the corner of a renovated warehouse, 2 stories of glass and light spilling onto the sidewalk. The windows gleamed with displays of dresses, arranged like art installations, ivory organza, muted rose, something shimmering in metallic thread. Inside, music thumped softly beneath the chatter of well-dressed guests. I hesitated at the entrance until a young hostess greeted me with professional brightness. "Welcome to Marchand and Roche Atelier," she said. Her tone carried that Charleston lilt smoothed by too many years at art school. I nodded, signed my name in the guest book, and stepped into a world that didn't quite belong to me. The space smelled faintly of champagne and perfume, the kind that costs more than rent used to. Every surface seemed to glisten mirrored tables, polished concrete, gilded frames holding sketches of upcoming collections. The room was beautiful, but it was also cold, like something designed to impress, but not to touch. Camille stood near the center, radiant under a halo of track lighting. She wore a black silk gown that looked simple until you noticed the hand-beaded cuffs and the way the fabric curved perfectly around her shoulders. People circled her like satellite stylists, investors, influencers, the local arts columnist who always used too many adjectives. She was smiling the way she smiled for photographs, all precision and intent. "Mom," David's voice came from behind me. Relief flickered in his eyes when he saw me. "You made it!" I smiled, taking in the faint exhaustion behind his grin. His tie was crooked, his posture tight. He kissed my cheek, his hand warm on my arm. "It's beautiful," I said. "She's done well." He nodded, though his smile faltered for half a heartbeat. "She's nervous. A lot of important people tonight. Then I'll stay out of the way. Please don't." He glanced toward his wife. "She'll want to greet you properly." We both knew what that meant publicly. Camille noticed us and glided over the crowd, parting like fabric, drawn aside by invisible thread. She kissed the air near my cheek. "Evelyn," she said, each syllable crisp. "You look lovely." "So do you," I replied, because it was true, and because the alternative would sound like bitterness. Her gaze drifted to the small gift box in my hand. "You didn't have to bring anything." I wanted to. I offered it gently, but her fingers only brushed it before she passed it to a nearby assistant. "Later," she murmured. A photographer appeared, then young Eager, smelling faintly of mint and ambition. "Mrs. Roche, could we get a few shots by the new collection wall?" Camille turned toward the cameras, posture perfect. David excused himself to greet a client, leaving me standing alone amid strangers discussing fabric weights and venture funds. Their words floated like static words about investors, collaborations, brand narratives. I understood every term, but not the tone. Everything here was a transaction disguised as conversation. I wandered toward the back, where a display of scarves hung under a skylight. None of them were handmade. I could tell from the symmetry the machine-stitched edges. They were beautiful in the way hotel art can be beautiful, designed to match, not to move. Someone offered me champagne. I declined. My reflection in the mirrored wall looked calm, composed, older than I remembered. The noise around me pulsed like an unfamiliar language. Camille's laugh carried across the room, warm on the surface, hollow underneath. I watched her tilt her head toward a man in a tailored suit, the kind of gesture that meant charm, not connection. For a moment, I tried to remember the last time I'd seen her laugh without calculation, or when family meant something more than a word printed on a wedding invitation. The music changed faster, louder. Flashbulbs popped. The boutique shimmered like a cathedral made of glass filled with light, but no warmth. I reached for the gift box on the table where her assistant had left it, running my hand over the ribbon, and felt the faint texture of the silk through the paper, a reminder of something made by hand, something human. I stayed a little longer, smiling when expected, saying polite things to polite strangers, until my cheeks ached. When Camille finally called for everyone's attention to begin her speech, I turned toward her, the box still in my hand, the room glittering around us like an expensive cage. Camille's speech lasted just long enough for everyone's glasses to empty and the photographer to refill his memory card. She thanked her team, her investors, and Charleston itself for embracing a modern vision of heritage. Every word was polished, every gesture measured. When she finished, the crowd applauded like well-trained students. Then she turned toward me. "And of course," she said, her voice bright, "I must thank my family. My husband, David, who built the bones of this place, and my mother-in-law, Evelyn Marchand, who came all the way here tonight." Heads turned. The sudden attention felt hot against my skin. I smiled because there was nothing else to do. "Evelyn even brought me a little gift," she continued. "May I open it?" There was no graceful way to refuse. She beckoned to her assistant, who handed her the small white box. I saw the ribbon still perfectly tied. She hadn't even looked at it earlier. She untied it slowly, performing for the room. The tissue paper rustled. The scarf unfolded in her manicured hands, light catching on the old silk, the deep red edging glowing faintly under the spotlights. "Oh," she said, smiling. "How lovely." The guests nearest to us murmured polite approval. One woman leaned forward, fingers grazing the fabric. "It's beautiful." Vintage Camille's smile tightened. "Something like that. She turned the scarf over, inspecting it, as if it were a specimen under glass. Her French accent thickened, something that happened when she wanted to sound worldly. Then, still smiling, she leaned toward her circle of friends and whispered in quick, fluid French, her tone light and confident. C'est du tissu de marché, du faux, un souvenir de touriste. Cheap market fabric, fake, a tourist trinket. Her friends laughed softly, the kind of laughter that knows it's safe because the person being mocked can't possibly understand. One of them added, charmante quand même, charming all the same. I stood just beside them holding my glass of water. My pulse slowed. I could feel the silk threads of my patience stretching thin. The French words struck the air like small, sharp needles. I had spoken that language for half my life. I'd written research papers in it, fallen in love in it, mourned in it. Hearing it turned into a weapon of dismissal, made something inside me tighten and go still. But I smiled the way Southern women are trained to smile when insulted, softly, gracefully, as if the words never reached the ear. My fingers rested lightly on the counter beside me. Camille folded the scarf with exaggerated care, still speaking in French. Elle a dû penser que ça paraîtrait authentique. C'est mignon, non? She must have thought it looked authentic. It's cute, isn't it? Someone near her giggled, and I saw a flicker of pride cross her face, the satisfaction of having performed cleverness. David hadn't heard. He was across the room talking to a client. Around us, the clinking of glasses and polite chatter filled the air again. I could have walked away. Pretended the language barrier existed, as she believed it did, but I stayed. Camille turned to a man beside her, one of the local investors, a lawyer whose name escaped me, and switched back to English. She has such a kind heart, she said sweetly, always thinking of little gestures. The lawyer smiled. That's wonderful. Yes, Camille said, lifting her glass. Family is everything. The words hung there smooth and false. I felt the weight of the scarf's history pressing on me, the years of craft, the hours of human hands weaving threads of silk, dyed by men who never knew their names would be forgotten. That small piece of fabric had survived more than ridicule. It had outlasted empire's floods and careless owners. I wanted to defend it, to defend the woman I'd been when I bought it. But the room shimmered with laughter and light, and the moment passed, carried off by the sound of another toast. Camille draped the scarf over her arm, still smiling for the cameras. The flash caught the faint sheen of the fabric, lighting it like a small flame about to burn out. She looked at me again, triumphant in her subtle cruelty. And for the first time I understood that she didn't just want to impress this crowd, she wanted to define me in front of them. To make sure they knew exactly where to place me, the provincial mother-in-law. Sentimental, naive, a remnant of an older world. I smiled back. It was small, steady, and gave away nothing. If she saw it as ignorance, so be it. I'd lived long enough to know that silence has its own kind of fluency. The applause started again for something I no longer heard. I set my glass down, folded my hands, and waited. Because words once spoken can't be unsaid, but the right ones saved for the right moment can change everything. For a long moment, I stood in the small circle of laughter, and light my heartbeat steady, almost detached. I had been dismissed before in my life by colleagues, by strangers, who assumed that age dulled understanding, but rarely with such careful arrogance. Camille's words still echoed around the rim of my glass. Cheap market fabric, fake. A tourist trinket. I could have let it go. That would have been the polite thing, the Charleston thing. But something in me, maybe the part that had spent years preserving fragile threads from centuries past, refused to let her words fray and vanish into air. I set my glass down on the marble counter. The sound was soft, but final. Then, with the same calm I used to use when presenting to a board of curators, I said in clear French, "Actually, Camille, I understand you perfectly. The air in the room shifted. Her laughter stopped mid-breath. The few guests nearest to us froze, wine glasses suspended. A flicker crossed her face, confusion. First, then disbelief. I took a small step closer, my tone, even my accent, unmistakably fluent. You said the scarf was tissue de marché, cheap market fabric, that it was du faux fake, a tourist souvenir, and that I must have thought it looked authentic. Did I miss anything? A ripple of shock ran through the group. Someone coughed into their drink. Camille's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her cheeks had lost color, and for the first time that night, she looked younger, less composed, almost frightened. I must have misheard, she stammered, finally, switching to English. You speak French? For most of my adult life, I said. I worked in Lyon for several years. Textiles restoration. It was before you knew David. Her eyes darted toward the small group now pretending not to watch. The investors, the art columnist, her assistant, they all suddenly found the floor fascinating. I see, she said slowly, her voice thinning. Then I suppose you misunderstood my tone. I was only joking. Ah, I replied, still in French. Then allow me to return the joke avec la même élégance. With the same elegance. I reached for the scarf where it lay folded on the table. This piece, I continued, was woven in Lyon in the late 1890s. Experimental silk from the Deschamps atelier. Only a few were ever made. The irregular stitching you mocked, its hand-dyed thread, proof of authenticity. The kind of imperfection machines can't replicate. Her face had gone perfectly still, like porcelain under pressure. The crowd around us had widened subtly, giving the illusion of privacy while making sure not to miss a word. Evelyn, she said quietly, in English. Now I think perhaps this isn't the time, I interrupted gently, but firmly. You're right, of course. But you chose the time, not me. The music had stopped somewhere in the background. The young man with the camera stood frozen, unsure whether to keep shooting. I brought this scarf, I went on, because I thought you might appreciate it, not for its cost, but for its craftsmanship. Because art and fashion, real ones, share a language, respect for the hands that create. I looked at her directly, but perhaps I was mistaken. Camille's lips parted again, but whatever she meant to say withered before it reached sound. Her assistant stepped forward, as if to intervene. But Camille raised a hand slightly, a gesture of pride or surrender. I didn't mean to offend, she whispered. Then don't, I said softly. It's easier than you think. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then somewhere behind us, a cork popped, breaking the silence like a gunshot. The noise in the room rose again, awkward and uneven people talking too loudly, pretending the scene hadn't just unfolded before them. David was crossing the floor now, his expression puzzled. What's going on? He asked, looking between us. Camille straightened, finding her composure with visible effort. Nothing, she said, just a misunderstanding. He looked at me, eyebrows raised. I smiled faintly. All settled, I said. But the lie sat between us thin and gleaming, like the thread of the scarf itself. A woman I didn't know, one of the patrons from New York, judging by the accent, stepped forward and touched the scarf. This is extraordinary, she said softly. The texture, it feels old, real. Camille's throat worked as she swallowed. Yes, she managed. It's vintage. The woman smiled at me. You have an eye, Mrs. Marchand. I've had practice, I replied. The woman nodded, studying the scarf with new respect. If this is truly Deschamps-era silk, it's quite rare. You don't see this kind of weave anymore. Her admiration drew a few others closer. Suddenly, the scarf was no longer a joke. It was the most interesting thing in the room. Camille's eyes flickered toward the attention she couldn't control. I folded the scarf back into its box, the silk, whispering softly, as I closed the lid. Perhaps you'll keep it safe, I said. It's more valuable than it appears. Our gazes met for the last time that evening. Hers was full of polite rage, mine of weary calm. Then I handed her the box and stepped back. David placed a hand on Camille's shoulder, confusion clouding his face. Everything okay? Perfect, she said through a brittle smile. I walked toward the door, the noise of the room swelling behind me. My reflection appeared for a moment in the glass pane, a woman older perhaps, lonelier than she'd imagined, but standing straighter than before. Outside, the air smelled of rain and sea salt. The streetlights flickered against the cobblestones, and the sound of distant music drifted from another corner of the city. I breathed in deeply, the taste of salt, sharp and clean, on my tongue. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I hadn't made it far from the boutique's door when I heard a woman's voice behind me, low melodic, touched with a French cadence that stopped me mid-step. "Excuse me, madame," she said. "May I see the scarf again?" I turned. She was perhaps in her late 40s, tall and slender, with silver-streaked hair drawn into a loose knot. A museum badge hung discreetly from her lapel, Dr. René Delacour, Musée des Tissus Lyon. For a moment, I thought I'd misread it. Then recognition flickered like an old photograph coming into focus. The Musée des Tissus, the very institution where I had first handled the Deschamps records decades ago. Camille stood beside her, arms folded, her smile stretched too thin. "Dr. Delacour, this isn't really—" But René's eyes were already on me. "Forgive the interruption," she said, switching seamlessly to English. "I couldn't help overhearing earlier. You mentioned the Deschamps atelier." Her tone was professional, but her gaze held a quiet curiosity. I nodded. Yes. This piece was part of a restoration study. I acquired it years ago in Lyon. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the box still in Camille's hands. Camille hesitated, then handed it over, her movements stiff. The silk unfolded across René's fingers like water. She examined it carefully, her fingertips tracing the edge where a faint, embossed seal still marked the fabric. "It's rare to see one intact," she murmured. These were experimental dyes, crimson, derived from cochineal, stabilized with copper sulfate. The technique was abandoned after 1902. Her eyes lifted to mine. "You said you acquired it in Lyon. May I ask where Rue des Antiquaires?" I said softly, "a small estate auction near Croix-Rousse." The owner's husband had been a pattern maker. René's expression brightened with recognition. "The Chen collection." "Of course." She smiled, a spark of excitement softening her scholarly composure. "We still have his workshop ledgers. Most of his test fabrics were presumed lost." Camille shifted beside us, her voice tight. "You mean it's real?" René blinked at her. "Réel mais oui. This is not a reproduction, madame. It's an original study from the Deschamps trials, one of maybe 3 known." The words seemed to hang in the air, fragile and heavy at once. A few nearby guests turned their heads, curiosity catching like flame. René refolded the scarf carefully, her tone almost reverent. Whoever preserved this understood its value, even if others didn't. She offered the box back to me with a small nod. "You have quite the eye, Mrs. Marchand." "Old habits," I said. "I used to catalog for a museum." Her smile deepened. "Then you know objects like this never choose their owners by accident." Camille stood motionless, her color draining again under the light. Around us, the murmurs grew faint and electric, and in the space where mockery had once lived, something else began to take shape. Respect, uneasy, but undeniable. René asked if there was any documentation, her voice, gentle but insistent, the kind used by those accustomed to uncovering truths without wounding pride. "Yes," I said quietly. "It's in my car." Camille's expression tightened, but she didn't object. Perhaps she couldn't. The murmurs around us hadn't stopped since René's announcement, And though no one spoke loudly, the shift in the room's air was unmistakable: interest, reverence, and a trace of embarrassment. I stepped outside into the cool Charleston night. The air smelled faintly of magnolia and rain-soaked pavement. From the back seat of my car, I retrieved a leather portfolio, edges worn corners, softened by years of travel. When I returned, the boutique had grown quieter. Some guests had left, others pretended to admire jewelry cases while listening closely. Camille stood near a mirrored wall, one hand around a champagne flute she hadn't lifted. Renee waited at a small display table beneath a hanging light. I laid the documents out carefully, the faded auction slip still bearing the Chen Estate's signature. A photograph from my restoration days showing me cataloging similar textiles. And a letter on ivory paper, the watermark of the Musée des Tissus, visible even under the boutique's dim light. Renee adjusted her glasses and began to read. Authentication references dye analysis. Mon Dieu, she murmured. This isn't just a prototype, it's from the Deschamps experimental dye series of 1897. The museum believed all physical samples were destroyed. Her excitement was quiet, but infectious. She looked up at me. Do you realize what you've preserved? I thought I did, I said, until tonight. Camille's voice cut through the space brittle as glass. So it's valuable. Renee turned toward her, surprised by the question's tone. Quite. At least $40,000, maybe $50,000, depending on provenance and preservation. But value isn't just monetary. This piece represents a lost stage in textile innovation. A silence followed, long, heavy, suffocating. David had reappeared near the edge of the crowd, his confusion giving way to dawning comprehension. You mean my mother-in-law just donated a piece of history to us? Renee smiled faintly. Not donated, I hope simply shared. True heritage cannot be owned, only cared for. Camille stared at the table, her knuckles pale against the stem of her glass. I didn't know, she whispered. No, I said softly. You didn't. Renee folded her hands together. Mrs. Marchand, if you're ever willing, the museum would be honored to document the scarf officially. It belongs to a story much larger than any of us. I nodded. I'd like that. She smiled, then excused herself to take a call, leaving Camille and me alone among the scattered guests. For the first time that night, Camille couldn't find her practiced charm. Her eyes flickered toward mine, then away. The facade she'd worn for years, a blend of confidence and control, seemed to have slipped, leaving something raw beneath. Evelyn, she said quietly, I didn't mean... I know, I interrupted. But meaning and manners don't always meet. Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. I gathered the papers back into my portfolio and slipped the scarf inside, folding it as gently as I would a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. Around us, the boutique had fallen nearly silent. The room that had once shimmered with light and laughter now felt fragile, as though one wrong word might break what little remained intact. I closed the clasp of the portfolio. Good night, Camille. She didn't stop me this time. The night after the opening, sleep refused to come. The hotel curtains breathed softly with the coastal wind, and the city outside murmured like distant water. I lay awake, the scarf's memory folded inside my mind, its silk sheen, its faint scent of dust and time. It had been years since I'd thought of Lion. Decades, really. Yet now every detail rose again with painful clarity. The cobblestones slick with morning rain, the smell of dye vats drifting from open windows, the echo of laughter from the silk apprentices down the hill. I was 22 when I first arrived there, a scholarship student with a second-hand suitcase and a head full of dreams. My French was halting, then my accent heavy, but I loved the way the words shaped themselves in my mouth, soft at the edges, patient, deliberate. The Musée des Tissus became my second home. I spent hours cataloging fragments of brocade, tracing the handwriting on century-old labels, learning the feel of authenticity under my fingertips. I learned to tell a story, not by reading it, but by touching it, the slight irregularity in thread tension, the warmth where a craftsman's hand once lingered. My mentor, Monsieur Lefebvre, used to say, "Les tissus gardent les secrets des mains qui les ont faits." Fabrics keep the secrets of the hands that made them. I believed him. It was in Lyon that I met Daniel, an American exchange student studying architecture, fluent in French, reckless with kindness. He would bring me café au lait during late nights at the museum, sketch the bridges and rooftops, while I annotated textile patterns. He said the city looked softer when I was in it. I laughed and told him silk did that to everything it touched. For 2 years, life unfolded like a tapestry, colorful, intricate, full of promise. Until his accident. It was winter 1974. The river flooded after a storm swallowing half the lower district. His car was found 3 days later. I remember the call from the police, the sound of rain against the window, the unfinished catalog pages on my desk. Afterward, the museum felt too quiet, the city too heavy. Every word of French reminded me of something I'd lost. So I came home. I found work cataloging textiles for smaller American collections where no one spoke the language that had once held my heart. Eventually, I stopped mentioning Lyon altogether. When people asked about my early years, I said I worked abroad. Nothing more. Years turned into decades. The language slipped beneath the surface of daily life, buried under grocery lists and seasons of silence. Until last night, when Camille's voice, sharp and careless, resurrected it. It wasn't the insult that stung most. It was the sound of my old life spoken without care, reminding me how much I'd once loved a world I'd chosen to forget. Now, lying in the half-light, I whispered a sentence I hadn't spoken in years. Je me souviens. I remember. And with it came everything I thought I had left behind. By morning, the boutique on Broad Street looked like the aftermath of a storm. Flower petals from last night's arrangements lay crushed along the marble floor, and the faint smell of spilled champagne lingered in the air. Camille sat alone in her glass office upstairs, the city, just beginning to stir beyond the windows. Her reflection in the pane startled her pale, tired, older than she wanted to admit. The phone on her desk blinked with new messages. Each one a variation of the same theme: questions, congratulations, and quiet skepticism. The first call had come at dawn. It was from her investor Douglas Pierce, who had flown in from Atlanta for the launch. "Camille," he said without preamble. I saw the press coverage. Beautiful photos, strong turnout, but what's this I'm hearing about an antique textile discovery? Something about your mother-in-law. Her pulse kicked. "Just a misunderstanding," she said quickly. A guest brought a vintage scarf and someone exaggerated the story. Exaggerated. Dr. Delacourt from Lyon confirmed it publicly. "Reporters are already calling it the highlight of the evening. They're saying your collection draws from that same atelier lineage." Camille forced a laugh that didn't sound like her. "Of course the inspiration is aligned. That's the brand's vision, reviving heritage." "Then you'll need to prove it," Douglas said. "Clients expect provenance. Investors expect authenticity. Send me documentation for all your textile sources before the end of the week." The line went dead before she could answer. She stared at her phone, at her trembling hand reflected in the glass. Documentation. Authenticity. Words she'd used 100 times in press releases but never tested against truth. Her entire line: silk wraps, couture shawls. The Heritage Collection was made from imported reproductions. Designed in Charleston, yes, but manufactured in bulk overseas. She'd built the illusion of craftsmanship, not the substance. And now, Evelyn, with one scarf and a lifetime of knowledge, had cracked that illusion in front of everyone who mattered. She stood abruptly, pacing the narrow space. Her assistant Claire appeared hesitantly in the doorway. "Camille, the local paper wants a statement." They're calling it a night of discovery. Camille turned sharply. No statements. Not yet. Claire hesitated. Dr. Delacourt also left a message she wants to discuss a possible collaboration with your studio. She said she believes your brand and Mrs. Marchand share a rare connection to the Deschamps legacy. Delete it, Camille snapped. All of it. Claire blinked. Delete it, just do it. Camille said, her voice cracking. When her assistant left, she sank into her chair, pressing her palms against her temples. She could still see Evelyn's calm face from the night before. No malice, no triumph, just truth spoken plainly. That quiet strength terrified her more than public ridicule ever could, because now the investors would ask questions, the buyers would want proof, and somewhere in Lyon, a curator held records that could expose every shortcut she'd taken. Her phone buzzed again, David. She stared at the name for a long time before answering. Camille, he said, voice rough from sleep. You left before I woke up. Are you okay? I'm fine, she said too quickly. Just dealing with the fallout from your mother's performance. Performance. She humiliated me in front of our clients, David. Do you understand what that did to the brand? He sighed. She didn't humiliate you. She corrected a mistake. A mistake? Camille's voice rose. You think I deserved that? She made me look like a fool in front of people who trust me. Everything I've built, everything you've built, he said quietly, wasn't meant to be a lie. The silence between them stretched like glass about to shatter. I have to go, she said finally, her throat tight. There's work to do. When the call ended, she sat in stillness, her hand resting on the scarf she'd taken from the boutique floor that morning. The silk shimmered faintly under the light, its colors richer than any of her replicas. She thought of the articles already circulating online, the hashtags about authentic artistry, the investors demanding verification. Camille closed her eyes, the fear in her chest thickening into something darker, a quiet resolve. If truth could destroy her, then she would make sure it never reached the light. By late afternoon, Charleston glowed under a soft gold haze. The streets hummed with tourists and carriage wheels. But inside, my hotel room, silence felt almost sacred. The scarf rested on the chair beside the window, folded neatly inside its box. Every now and then, I caught myself glancing toward it as if it might breathe. My phone buzzed a number from France. I hesitated before answering. Madame Marchand, a familiar voice, greeted warm and professional. It's Dr. René Delacourt. I hope this isn't a bad time. Not at all, I said, my pulse quickening. I wanted to thank you again for allowing me to examine your piece last night, she said. It's been on my mind since I returned to my hotel. I reached out to our archives department this morning. There was something intriguing about the seal. I sat straighter. The embossing at the edge. Yes. We compared the photograph I took with our digital registry. Her voice brightened with quiet excitement. It matches one of the Deschamps prototypes listed in our 1901 ledger. The mark is authentic, hand-pressed from the atelier's own die. You have one of the two surviving pieces. The words hung between us, delicate and vast. One of two, I repeated softly. We. The other is preserved in our permanent collection. Yours, however, is in far better condition. If you would permit, the museum would like to include it in our upcoming exhibition, Les Mains Invisibles, the Invisible Hands. It's devoted to artisans whose names were never recorded. For a moment, the air left my chest. It would belong there, I said. That's what those hands deserve. René's tone softened. Then I'll begin the paperwork. You've done something rare, madame. You've kept history alive. When the call ended, I sat in silence, the hum of the air conditioner filling the space where my thoughts should have been. I hadn't expected recognition. I hadn't wanted it. But it arrived all the same, quiet, undeniable, and heavy with consequence. By evening, the story had already begun to spread. A small arts blog from Atlanta published an article, "Boutique Launch in Charleston Unveils Rare Textile Discovery." The photographs showed me and Renee beside the scarf, and one line caught my eye. Ironically, the find highlights questions of authenticity in modern design. Questions. That word moved fast. Within hours, social media picked up the thread. Anonymous comments. Speculation about Camille's heritage materials, murmurs that her collection wasn't as handmade as advertised. I didn't have to search for the articles. They found me. One pinged through an old friend from New York. "Is this about your daughter-in-law?" Another came from a former museum colleague, offering congratulations and curiosity in the same breath. It wasn't malice. It was momentum. At 9, David called. His voice sounded worn, like it had traveled too far to reach me. "Mom, have you seen the news I have? She's..." He stopped, exhaling. "She's falling apart. The investors pulled out this afternoon. Someone leaked that her suppliers are from Guangdong, not Lyon. They're demanding proof she used heritage textiles." I closed my eyes. "And she can't." "She's blaming you. That doesn't surprise me. I told her you didn't leak anything, that you'd never..." "I wouldn't," I said. "I know." His voice cracked a little. "But she's desperate. She said she'll lose everything. The boutique, the contracts, her reputation." I looked out the window at the slow drift of dusk over the city. "David, what do you want me to do?" "I don't know," he whispered. "You didn't ask for any of this, but if there's any way to stop it before it gets worse." There was a long silence between us. The kind filled with the weight of what children don't say to their parents, that they want to believe in fairness, but they still need protection from it. After the call, I sat at the desk, hands folded over the museum letter Renee had already emailed, a formal verification, stamped with her signature, and the crest of the Musée des Tissus. It was the kind of document that settled debates, that drew a sharp line between what was true and what was imitation. And somewhere in Charleston, Camille was watching that line swallow her career. Around midnight, another message appeared, this one from Renee. "Madame Marchand, the museum has confirmed public interest in the piece. We've also received several inquiries from journalists. Would you like to be identified as the owner?" I didn't reply right away. My reflection in the darkened window looked older than I felt, softer than I'd been last night. Ownership, it sounded like power, but it also sounded like burden. I thought of Camille's face when the truth had first cracked open before her. The shock, the humiliation. And behind it, the fear of losing control. The same fear that once made me leave Lyon, that once silenced me for decades. Now the truth was a living thing, again breathing in public. And though I hadn't meant to wound her, the blade was out of my hands. The scarf rested on the chair, catching a thin beam of streetlight through the curtain. Its threads shimmered faintly alive, enduring indifferent to the noise of our fragile pride. I picked up the phone, typed out a reply, then deleted it. My fingers hovered over the keys. Somewhere beyond the glow of the city, a woman who had mocked my cheap gift was watching her empire unravel. The museum wanted truth. The world demanded spectacle. And my son, he just wanted peace. I closed the laptop and turned off the lamp. The room fell into quiet shadow, the only sound the slow hum of night pressing against the glass. Camille asked to meet at the boutique after closing. Her message had arrived just after sunset, short, polite, but shaking with tension beneath the punctuation. "Please come alone." When I arrived, the front windows were dark, the displays already stripped of their bright arrangements. Only the soft light above the counter remained glowing like a stage lamp over an empty set. Camille stood near the back, arms folded, a silk scarf knotted tight around her neck. Not mine, but one of her reproductions. Her hands trembled slightly as she straightened the hem of her blazer. "You came," she said, her voice rough. You asked. The faintest laugh escaped her lips, brittle, humorless. Of course, when you summon a storm, you shouldn't be surprised when it answers. I didn't reply. I set the leather portfolio on the counter, placing the museum's printed verification letter on top. The paper caught the light, its embossed seal unmistakable. She stared at it, then at me. You could have ignored it, she said. You could have told that curator not to call. You could have kept your little treasure quiet, and none of this would have happened. None of this, I repeated. Her voice sharpened. Do you know what they're saying about me, that I'm a fraud, a thief, a liar? The investors pulled everything. The suppliers won't take my calls. The papers that once begged for interviews now call me a disgrace. I studied her for a moment, the restless flick of her hands, the strain tightening her jaw. Beneath the fury was fear, raw and unguarded. I didn't set out to destroy you, Camille, I said. The truth did that on its own. She slammed her palm against the counter, the sound echoing off the glass. Don't you dare act innocent. You've been waiting to humiliate me since the day we met. I kept my voice steady. No, I've been waiting for you to grow into the woman David believes you are. Her breath hitched. He told you, didn't he, about the investors, about the factory? I didn't need him to, I said. You told the world yourself every time you built a story out of illusion. Authenticity isn't a word you borrow. It's a life you live. Her composure wavered, the fury fracturing into something close to grief. You don't understand, she whispered. Everything depended on this launch. My brand, my reputation, me. I wanted to build something real. Then why build it on lies? She looked up sharply, eyes bright with tears that refused to fall. Because no one listens to women who start small, she said. You have to look perfect before they'll believe you're capable. And I was so close, Evelyn. So close. The room went quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the faint creak of the wooden floor beneath us. I thought of myself at her age, ambitious, certain, terrified of being invisible. I knew that hunger, the one that devours gentleness, before it ever feels success. I slid the verification letter across the counter. This belongs to you now. The museum will contact me, but the piece was meant for your collection. Handle it properly. She looked down at the letter, but didn't touch it. After everything I said, yes, I said. Because I know what it's like to lose something precious. She shook her head. You're just doing this to make me feel smaller. No, I said softly. You did that yourself. Her shoulders slumped, as though the words themselves had weight. The fight drained from her, replaced by a silence that was neither surrender nor forgiveness. I thought you'd be proud, she said finally, her voice fragile, that I made something of myself. I am proud, I said, but pride without honesty is just fear wearing good shoes. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. The tears finally came quiet, unannounced, cutting trails through her makeup. She turned away, and I gave her the grace of not watching. When she spoke again, her voice was almost childlike. They'll never trust me again. Then start over, I said. Not as a designer who fakes heritage, but as a woman who honors it. Camille wiped her cheeks, staring down at the paper between us, as if it were a mirror she didn't know how to face. I don't know if I can. You can, I said, but you'll have to decide whether you want redemption or attention. The clock above the door ticked softly, marking the long pause that followed. I wish you'd stayed silent, she whispered at last. I stayed silent for years, I said, and silence doesn't protect truth. It only delays it. Camille looked at me, then truly looked. For the first time, I saw something human behind her ambition, a trembling awareness of everything she'd built and broken. When I turned to leave, she didn't stop me. The scarf around her neck shifted as she exhaled its threads, catching the light. Behind me, the boutique's door clicked shut with a sound that felt final, but not cruel, like a curtain closing before the next act could begin. The next morning broke sharp and clear sunlight cutting through Charleston's humidity like a blade. I stood outside the Meridian Hotel ballroom, the glass doors gleaming with press banners for the future of Southern design. Inside, voices buzzed reporters, sponsors, industry figures. I hadn't planned to attend, but Renee had insisted the museum's announcement be public for proper acknowledgement. When I entered, I spotted her near the front, poised and calm behind the podium. The scarf lay displayed in a glass case beside her, its crimson edges glowing faintly under the lights. Camille sat several rows back, her posture stiff, her sunglasses still on indoors. Renee began with her signature poise clear, measured the kind of authority that silenced rooms. The Musée des Tissus in Lyon has concluded its verification, she said. This scarf is indeed a 19th century Deschamps prototype, one of only 2 known to exist. Its preservation is extraordinary. Cameras flashed. Applause rippled through the crowd. Renee continued describing the atelier's craftsmanship, its lost techniques, its connection to the heritage of textile innovation. But then, one reporter raised a hand, Dr. Delacour. What about the boutique's claim that their collection used similar authentic materials from Lyon? Does this discovery support that? The air shifted. Renee hesitated, professional but unflinching. No, she said finally. There is no record of any such purchase. The materials currently marketed under that label are modern reproductions. Excellent quality, but reproductions nonetheless. The silence that followed was heavy, fragile. Then came the flurry questions, overlapping photographers, repositioning whispers spreading like sparks. Are you saying the designer's authenticity claims were falsified? Will the museum investigate collaboration fraud? Who supplied the falsified documentation? Renee refused to elaborate. Our responsibility is to history, not to scandal, she said. But the damage was already done. Camille stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. The sunglasses slipped from her face, revealing eyes rimmed red. She left the ballroom without a word. By noon, the headlines were everywhere. Charleston designers brand in crisis after fabric fraud allegations. Authenticity or illusion? The heritage scandal behind Marchand Atelier. I saw the footage replayed in the hotel lobby. Renee's calm explanation, Camille's silent exit. Reporters clustered outside the boutique by evening. 2 staff members resigned within hours. By the next day, sponsors pulled their contracts. I watched it all unfold from a distance, sitting by the window of my small rented room. The scarf lay across my lap, fragile but enduring its threads, older than every voice now shouting about truth and shame. David called once, his voice raw with exhaustion. They're tearing her apart, he said. She won't speak to anyone. I know, I said quietly. Mom, you didn't want this. No, I whispered. But wanting and deserving don't always live in the same house. After he hung up, I sat in silence, watching the sun sink behind the harbor, its reflection scattering like glass across the water. The city hummed with consequence. But inside, all I felt was the quiet ache of justice, cold necessary, and far lonelier than I had imagined. David came to my hotel late that night, still in the clothes he'd worn to the press event. His tie was loose, his eyes shadowed. He didn't knock loudly, just once, as if unsure he wanted me to answer. I opened the door and he stood there for a moment, hands deep in his pockets, the weight of something unspeakable hanging between us. Can I come in? He asked. Of course. He sat at the small desk by the window, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. They're saying the museum confirmed everything, he said finally, that the scarf is real, that Camille's line isn't. It's true. He nodded slowly. She's in pieces, Mom. Reporters outside the house. Her investors want refunds. Her name. He broke off, his voice thick. You humiliated her in public. I took the folder from the table, the same one I'd given Camille, and opened it to the museum's verification letter. She did that herself, I said quietly. All I did was stop pretending. He looked at the papers but didn't touch them. She lied, he said. I know that now, but you could have told me. You could have stopped it before all this. She wouldn't have listened, I said. And you would have thought I was jealous or meddling. You needed to see her truth in daylight. David's eyes filled, and for the first time in years he looked like the boy I used to comfort after nightmares. I just wanted you both to get along. So did I said softly. But sometimes peace demands honesty first. He pressed his palms to his eyes, trying to steady himself. I don't know how to fix this. You don't have to fix it, I said. You just have to decide what kind of man you'll be when love and truth stop holding hands. He didn't answer. He stood leaned down and kissed my forehead before leaving. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the room filled with the scent of rain and silence. I folded the letter back into its envelope and watched the harbor lights flicker small, distant, but steadfast against the dark. Morning light crept through the curtains, pale and forgiving. The storm of headlines had quieted overnight, leaving behind the soft, uneasy silence that follows a public reckoning. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee gone cold, the museum's documents still spread across the table. Between them, half hidden under a stack of envelopes, was an old letter I hadn't read in years, Daniel's handwriting slanted and familiar. I unfolded it carefully. The paper had yellowed along the creases, but his words were as steady as the day he'd written them. The strongest threads he'd told me are those woven gently. Pull too hard and even silk will break. He'd written that during our time in Lyon when we were both young and learning how fragile beauty could be. Back then, I believed gentleness was a weakness, a pause between acts of survival. But now, decades later, I could almost hear his voice again, calm and sure, reminding me that the quietest gestures often outlast the loudest victories. I set the letter beside the scarf. The two belonged together. His words, its threads, both survivors of time and care. For the first time since that night in the boutique, I felt something soften inside me. Perhaps truth wasn't meant to crush, only to clear a space for something better to grow. Outside, Charleston shimmered in the sunlight, washed clean by the night's rain. Somewhere across town, Camille was facing her own silence, and David was caught between us, holding both pieces of a fractured family. I couldn't undo what had been said or unsaid, but maybe I could choose what came next. I traced Daniel's final line with my fingertip. Gentleness isn't surrender, Eve. It's how things hold together when pride lets go. And for the first time in days, I allowed myself to breathe. It was late March when Camille came. The azaleas had just begun to bloom pink and white against the fence line, and Charleston smelled faintly of salt and earth after a morning rain. I was pruning the small garden behind my townhouse when I heard a car door close, then hesitant footsteps on the brick path. When I turned, she was standing there, unrecognizable in her simplicity. Gone were the flawless curls, the designer heels, the practiced poise. She wore a plain linen dress and carried no handbag, just a small envelope clutched in both hands. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen as if she hadn't slept in days. Evelyn, she said softly. May I come in? I nodded, leading her toward the porch. We sat opposite each other, a small table between us, steam rising from the teapot I'd forgotten to bring inside. The air hummed with that quiet tension that lives between women who have seen too much of each other's pride. I owe you an apology, she said, her voice trembling. For what I said, for what I did, for how I treated you. I didn't answer. I let the words fall unhurried into the space between us. She took a shaky breath. When everything fell apart, the gallery, the brand, I thought I'd lost my identity. But what I really lost was the illusion that I ever understood respect. Her accent wavered, then softened as she switched languages. Je suis désolée, she whispered. J'ai tout perdu, mais j'ai appris à me taire et à écouter. I have lost everything, but I have learned to be silent and listen. Her French was imperfect, hesitant, yet every syllable carried the weight of humility I had never heard from her before. I poured tea for both of us. The motion steadied my hands. Respect, I said after a long pause, isn't spoken. It's shown. Camille looked up, her eyes wet but steady. Then let me show it, she said. I've started teaching free design workshops downtown for students who can't afford tuition. I tell them to begin with their hands, not their image. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. That's a good place to start. She exhaled, the tension in her shoulders loosening. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to thank you for not hiding the truth, even when it destroyed everything I thought I was. I studied her face, the exhaustion, the fragile honesty, the first signs of growth. The girl who once mocked a gift now looked like someone learning to earn her own. Camille, I said quietly, you still have time to become the woman you pretended to be. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind stirred the branches above us, scattering pale petals across the porch. She reached into her envelope and slid a small photograph across the table. It was of the scarf framed behind glass in the Lyon exhibition, its colors glowing like captured sunlight. They called it La Mémoire du Fil, she said. The memory of thread. I traced the outline of the frame with one finger. That's fitting. When she rose to leave, I walked her to the gate. She turned once her eyes meeting mine, not with defiance this time, but with quiet gratitude. As she drove away, I looked back at the empty chair on the porch and thought of Daniel's words still folded in my desk drawer. The strongest threads are those woven gently. For the first time, I understood. By autumn, Charleston had slipped back into its slower rhythm. The air grew softer, the market smelled of persimmons and dye, and the river shimmered like a memory half awake. It had been nearly a year since the night of the boutique opening, since truth cracked open like glass, and everything that came after had to be built again, piece by fragile piece. I received the invitation on thick ivory paper, stamped in gold. Marchand Atelier Grand Reopening. Below it, a simple line in smaller print in collaboration with the Musée des Tissus Lyon. When I arrived, the same building stood there on Broad Street, but the atmosphere was unrecognizable. Gone was the pretense, the curated glamour. The walls now held framed sketches of artisans, weavers, and small workshops, each credited by name. A table near the entrance displayed bolts of genuine silk, each labeled with its region, its maker, its story. Renee greeted me first, elegant as always, her smile touched with something warmer than professionalism. It's good to see you again, Evelyn, she said. We couldn't have done this without you. I think you could have, I replied, though her hand on mine said otherwise. Camille appeared a moment later. She wore a plain black dress, her hair pinned back. Her movements quieter, more deliberate. There was no press, no cameras, only a few clients, museum donors and local apprentices who had come to celebrate what felt less like a reopening and more like a rebirth. Thank you for coming, she said. Her voice was steady but soft. Renee and I wanted to do this right this time. Every piece here comes from hands that deserve to be known. We walked together to the back wall, where a small display stood under a single light. Inside a glass frame hung the scarf, the same one that had started everything. Its crimson threads glowed faintly under the spotlight, the pattern luminous and alive. Beneath it, a silver plaque read, "Gift of Evelyn Marchand, proof that truth endures." For a long moment, none of us spoke. The air around the silk shimmered slightly, as if even light itself paused to honor it. Camille turned to me, her eyes glistening. They wanted to call it La lumière à travers la soie, the light through silk. It's beautiful, I said. It's yours, she whispered. But I hope you'll let it stay here, It belongs where people can see what honesty looks like when it's woven into something real. I nodded. It already is. Across the room, the young apprentices were laughing softly as they studied fabrics Renee had brought from France. Their voices mingled with the hum of quiet music, gentle, human, unguarded. When the evening ended, Camille walked me to the door. The street outside was washed in amber light, and a faint breeze carried the scent of rain mixed with dye and jasmine. She touched my arm lightly. I think about that night every day, she said, and I think, maybe it saved me. I smiled. Then it was worth the breaking. She nodded, her eyes shining, and stepped back into the shop. I lingered a moment longer, then turned to leave. The boutique glowed behind me, a beacon of soft color through glass. As I reached the corner, the lights inside dimmed one by one until only the case with the scarf remained, illuminated its red edges, gleaming like the last breath of daylight. I imagined Daniel's voice then, gentle and certain. The strongest threads are those woven gently. And as I walked home through the quiet Charleston evening, I thought perhaps gentleness had been the truest language of all.